Welcome everyone, Questine here with the discussion about Age of Empires 4 review, if you will. And to answer the question, is it worth it? It's the most common question I get with regards to this game on streams, on videos. Is this game worth it? Have they succeeded in making a good game? Because Relic Entertainment, the developers, did set out with the mission objective by Microsoft to make a game similar to Age of Empires 2, to be a spiritual successor to Age of Empires 2. And have they succeeded in that, or have they failed? Well, as far as I'm concerned, as someone who has played quite a bit of Age of Empires 2 and the entirety of the Age series, in Age of Empires 1, 2, 3, Age of Mythology in particular, my personal favorite, I have to say that they've done a pretty solid job. Not a perfect job. There are issues. There's a lack of polish in certain areas, problems with the balance, problems with the design, problems with the way the game looks, maybe even some performance issues that people have experienced. But overall, I feel that they've done a pretty solid job. And if you want to find the answer to the question yourself, you can actually play this game for only $1 if you get the Xbox Game Pass. I believe it's $1 trial period for everyone. I mean, I certainly was able to get it. That's how I'm personally playing the game. And look, regardless of how you ultimately feel about the game, spending $1 just to try it out is absolutely worth it from my perspective. And then you can draw your own conclusions. My advice for anyone that's new, do the Art of War, even if it's not necessarily the greatest Art of War, like Age 2 has a better Art of War. Do the Art of War, do the tutorials, maybe play some of the campaigns, some skirmishes, watch some video guides that myself and other people have made on how to play the game, and then, you know, really jump into multiplayer. But with all that being said, here's how I feel about the game. Relic did set out with that objective of making a spiritual successor of Age of Empires 2. But Relic as a company, let's just say they've had a troubled decade, really. The last good game, or the last game that they've made that is generally considered good on a universal level, is Ultramarine. And before that, Dawn of War 2. So in over a decade, they haven't released anything that's won universal acclaim. Company of Heroes 2, let's just say opinions are mixed, to say the least, about that, especially if we're talking about Russia. I think that's overblown, but certainly Company of Heroes 2 was not as well received as it could have been. And then Dawn of War 3 ended up being a pile of trash. So let's just say Relic has had some issues ever since they've been acquired by Sega. There's been plenty of issues with the decisions they've made. In particular with Dawn of War 3, it was really frustrating to see a developer that had made these gritty, realistic, serious games go down the route of, oh, we're gonna make our game look like a MOBA because, hey, the Fortnite crowd or the League of Legends crowd or Dota crowd, those are the people we want. Yeah, but it's not how your game looks. Like, making this cartoony, stylized graphics is not going to attract people to it. Maybe I'm wrong. What the hell do I know? But it really felt like that with Dawn of War 3 and in this game as well. They've gone with a similar graphical style in that respect. I mean, sure, it's a medieval game, but it's still colorful, it's still stylized, it's still goofy and cartoony, mixed in with some very realistically looking buildings and armors, but nonsensical weapons, and overall the style just doesn't work. Graphically, I feel the game doesn't look all that great. I mean, it's nice on a technical level, and indeed there are quite a few moments when I'm playing the game and I'm really appreciating how it looks, but at the same time, the insanely huge weapons are a drawback. Now, they say that the reason they made the weapons so big is so people could differentiate between the units, but it doesn't even work like that, because there are many units, especially once you get upgrades for them, like elite versions, where the armor starts looking the same and they just start blending into each other, and it can be very difficult to figure out which of your units are which. Like, I was struggling in one game, I remember at the technical stress test, I remember struggling in one game to tell apart my longbowmen versus my crossbowmen. Eventually you figure it out, but you should be able to tell at a glance. You shouldn't have to think about it. You shouldn't have to focus on it. This is something many other strategy games, including the ones that Relic themselves have made, have been able to do very effectively. even when units look the same, I mean, the icons that they have in Dawn of War 2 and Free has large-scale battles, believe it or not. Yeah, I'm going to give praise to Dawn of War 3 because it has large-scale battles, and Warhammer has a lot of units that may look the same but are very different, and yet I've never struggled in a Dawn of War game, any of them, to determine which of my units are which, what roles they have, what type they are. And again, that's a game series, and in an IP where a lot of units may look the same. Maybe that's because they're using the models from Games Workshop has an understanding of how to make things look distinct, but it just doesn't work in this game. Like, they did a pretty poor job with the graphics on an artistic level. Technical level, I mean, the engine they're using is strong. They're using the same engine for Company of Heroes 3. We played Company of Heroes 3, the pre-alpha. That was pretty good, and it's quite a shame to go from something like that looks pretty nice overall. Some issues here and there, and it's a pre-alpha, optimization wasn't the best, but it's a shame to go from something like that to a game like this. Now, I'm not sure if it's Relic's decisions or Microsoft's decision that led to the game looking like this. It could be a mix of both. Could be Microsoft trying to push for the Fortnite crowd, the League of Legends crowd, the Dota crowd. Could be Relic making that same mistake again. Could be both of them. And I really dislike this. I feel that we should move away from this crap, or as people have called it, making the game look like all those mobile game ads. Not how mobile games actually look, because they're not that great looking, but mobile game ads. I really, really detest this kind of style, and I think it doesn't work well. And even if I'm willing to move past how I feel about the graphical style, it causes issues. The way they ultimately did it causes issues in the battles in terms of being able to determine what your own damned army is, let alone what the enemy army. Like horsemen looking like lancers, spearmen looking like minotaurs because they're using the same armor. Even with the oversized weapon, like, it is a problem. It is a problem in this particular title, and unlike other things which may be improved upon, may be fixed, this is not something you can fix because, surprise, surprise, the graphical elements were done long, long ago. It would be very difficult to change them. So that's one major drawback, the graphical style. The game seems to run fine, performance-wise. The technical stress test didn't have the best performance. I haven't had any major performance issues that I've noticed. I haven't run with an FPS counter on, but I haven't really noticed major FPS dips, maybe here and there in some very large-scale battles. But overall, I think the game runs pretty well, actually, and I'm playing on the maximum setting, even settings that they don't recommend you use, but I've cranked everything up to the highest possible level. And I think the game I think the game runs pretty well. And on a technical level, I actually think it looks pretty good. Just the artistic direction they chose to go with is very disappointing from my perspective. But that aside, graphics aside, what about sounds? Does the game have good sound effects, good music? Yeah, the music is pretty solid, very distinct, very fitting to each of the civilizations. The unit sounds, I mean, I don't know what it is with age games that we can't have the English actually speaking in English. I know it's old English and all that, but yeah, I think that's a bit silly. But yeah, the game sounds fine. Some sounds I do dislike, like when your villagers are killing the sheep. That's a fairly annoying sound. Some other things as well, a couple of things, minor quibbles really. But for the most part, the way they've handled the sounds is pretty solid, pretty good. One thing to say, however, is that you have these heroes in the campaigns, Joan of Arc and all that, and they don't seem to have unique voice actors. Like, they're reusing a lot of stuff for that. They don't have a character-focused story. And that's where I'm going to go with next. The campaigns. Are they good or are they bad? Are they worth playing? It's a hit and miss situation. I feel some of the campaign missions are absolutely interesting. Some of them are pretty garbage, really. And either because the way they've balanced the difficulty in these campaigns is horrible. I've played every single mission of every single campaign on the highest difficulty. Some were a cakewalk, some were very frustrating to deal with, especially because they're only difficult because you have, say, no gold on the map or limited resources. Because if you didn't have so many limited resources, if you had, say, 1 or 2 gold piles at the start, it would be significantly easier. So that's pretty annoying to have to deal with, having to deal with an enemy that has better upgrades than you, unlimited resources, unlimited troops, and you're limited because you don't even start with anything. Like or missions where you can't get to market. Even if I had like truckloads of food and wood that I could trade or sell for gold, I still can't do that. The mission design is all over the place. The difficulty curve is all over the place. This is nothing new for Relic, however. I've played every single one of their games. In every single one of their strategy games, this has been an issue. Where you have missions that are really easy, then you have missions that are ridiculously difficult, then you have missions that are just plain fucking frustrating, especially when you're playing on the highest difficulty. And this is a constant in every single one of their games, be it the Homeworld series, Dawn of War, Company of Heroes, it doesn't matter. It is an issue in every single title we're talking about, in every single game. It's actually less of an issue, believe it or not, in Dawn of War 3, and so far from what I saw in the pre-alpha and Company of Heroes 3, but in this game, it certainly feels like that. And I'm just annoyed when developers do this shit, when developers make bullshit missions, especially on the highest level, when they can't handle difficulty levels in any way, shape, or form. It makes me wonder, why the hell are you even doing difficulty levels if you're doing such a shitty job? Like one mission in particular, in the French campaign, the third mission of the French campaign, you have feudal age units, you don't have any gold, you're constantly being attacked by castle age units with full upgrades throughout the mission, and your objective is actually to take the free villages, potentially deal with the raiders that are constantly harassing you throughout all of this, and again, limited resources. Just so frustrating, so annoying to have to deal with that. Relic has never designed missions well in terms of difficulty. I mean, the worst example I can think of is Dawn of War Dark Crusade. That's the epitome of bullshit difficulty levels, or bad mission design, if you will. There's so many horrible, grindy missions that turn into a slog. And many of those end up being very frustrating, and you don't want to play again. Like, I don't want to play the campaigns again in Age of Empires 4, because they're either slog, they're either grindy, they're very difficult, or if they're not those things, they're a cakewalk. That's the worst part about it. Like, oh, just lower the difficulty. Oh, so it can just steamroll over everything else? I'm not saying the mission design in previous Age of Empires games was the best. Absolutely not. I still remember the difficulty of Age of Mythology, the Titans, or some of the campaigns in Age of Empires 2. Absolutely, there's a load of nonsense in that. But they could have done better. Relic never has done better, in my perspective right now, is that if you can't handle this properly, just don't implement difficulty levels. Make a damn good mission design. Make a proper difficulty curve for those missions, not missions where, not like, say, the final Mongol mission, which is just so laughable because you can win it by just building a couple of overpowered catapults, which is the main objective anyway, and they just sieging the enemy to death. It is disappointing in that respect. And story-wise, they've chosen not to focus on characters, so you don't have voice characters, you don't have the interesting narrative that you would have, say, in H2, like, regardless of the campaign you're playing on. You were invested when you were playing the Mongol campaign or the French campaign in Age of Empires 2 in the default game, because it was the story of Genghis Khan, or the Mongols in general, or their story, Jeanne d'Arc. They were trying to do something similar, where they're focusing on the story of a place like Moscow, or the story of people with the Mongols, but just kind of falls flat. The attachment you have is just not there. Might have helped to have had better mission design, but I just think the way they're telling the story just isn't that great. The narrators we had in H2, I feel, did a substantially better job, and the script they were working with was significantly better. Like, there was more emotion, you felt something, you were invested in it. Here you're not. The most interesting thing about the campaigns actually are these documentaries that they put together about these people, these cultures, weaponry, way of life, all that. in the Middle Ages. That's actually the most interesting aspect of the campaigns, unlocking those, watching those. It kind of feels like they're trying to be the Discovery Channel here, or the History Channel. But that was very interesting those were very interesting to watch, and actually a joy. I'd say that's the best part of it, and it feels like probably much of their story budget or voice acting budget that they could have used went into those. But at the same time, like, you have those interesting documentaries, but you don't have compelling narratives in the campaign, so you do have hit and miss with this. As for the gameplay, how does it feel? How does it play? Well, if you've played Age of Empires 2, it will feel very familiar. This isn't to say it's the same. There are many major and smaller and minor differences between this game and Age of Empires 2. In the way you handle your economy, in the way you handle your military, the pathfinding is different, the control of units is different, and not in the best way possible in some cases. Like, one of the annoying things that to deal with is actually the pathfinding. Like, yeah, you have units being able to move through units so they're not getting stuck as they would in H2. You have better pathfinding. You do have arrows, heat-seeking arrows as people call it, so those can look really weird. But I feel overall like the gameplay fundamentals are good for the most part. There are just some annoyances, like if you have units next to a building, they'll prioritize attacking those buildings, or the routes that units take when you're giving them an attack order just can end up being so ridiculous, and units take so much damage. And by the way, these issues that you might have as a player, where units get stuck on buildings, or ranged units in particular have this problem. In H2, if a unit was attacked by another unit, all the ranged units, or all the units in general, even if they were attacking structures by default because they weren't doing anything, if units were attacking structures, they would deprioritize the structure, instead focus on the threat. Here, they tend to stick to attacking structures even when that's highly detrimental, so you have to micromanage your units. And this is something, by the way, that the AI struggles with as well. The AI is very stupid and very exploitable, and significantly weaker than what we have in Age of Empires 2. The most difficult AI in Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition would never fall for the tricks that people can use here in this game to defeat the hardest AI. In fact, defeating the hardest AI is very easy. You just do a simple Castle Age rush, Night Rush, and you will win every single game. Ever since I've been doing that strategy, I haven't lost a single game against the hardest AI. Unless I just didn't care because I was doing it for some achievement. Like, those are the only skirmish games I've lost since I've been using those strategy games, where I deliberately quit because I'm doing achievements. Outside of that, very easy to beat the hardest AI, so that's disappointing. And just gameplay issues in that respect. There's also, of course, balance issues between the factions. Some factions are just very powerful. The Rus, the French, to a degree, the HRE, and the English. They are very powerful factions. And then there's factions like the Delhi Sultanate, the Abbasids, the Chinese, and the Mongols, which are behind. Yes, the Mongols have a broken town center at the moment, which they can exploit to maybe get some cheap wins, but overall the faction is weak, is not where it needs to be. So there's balance issues between the factions. There's policy issues, and I think to some extent that was expected, because Age of Empires 2 Definitive Edition has had many years and a very large community, and improvements being added over the years, and a team of developers that does seem to be willing to listen to the player base to implement improvements and to deal with issues as they arise. So that's why Age of Empires 2, despite the fact I don't like how the game overall plays, I don't think it's aged all that well in every way. H2, for all the issues it has, for the fact that it's been out for so many years, is a very polished product. It does have issues related to the fact that when it was originally made, but they've put a lot of thought in balancing, design, all that over the years, and implementing new factions, all that. Here it feels less polished, less balanced between the factions, and some of that, of course, is developers making a new game, implementing some unique mechanics like the hunting bounty for the Rus, as an example, or the movable buildings for the Mongols. That's great, but the problem is the problem is that some of it could have been avoided if they had listened to the community. The communication between the community and the developers is pretty weak. Whereas with Definitive Edition, you do feel the community feels like the developers actually care about the problems people have. But whereas here, it feels like they don't. Like, we have the zoom issue, and the zoom is better than it was before in the technical stress test, but we still should have better zoom. Hell, even zooming in would be nice to be able to look at the detail on some of the units, the armors on some of these units. It would be nice to have a zoom in feature and a better zoom out, but we don't want to give people an option, either because it's an advantage or they don't want to or whatever. It just feels silly. To me, in my mind, it's just as silly as the developer saying, oh, we don't want to put an FOV slider in a first-person shooter. It's about player comfort. I mean, Age of Empires 2 has this zoom feature, and it's a very competitive game being played by quite a lot of people. If the argument is over... If the argument is over the fact that some people would get the competitive advantage, that is absolutely not fucking true. If the argument is, oh, it doesn't fit our vision as a developer, well, your vision as a developer may not be the perfect one, and sometimes you may want to listen to what the community has to say, because maybe the community in some cases, not in every case, may know better. So I feel like overall though, I feel the game has had a decent start despite everything I've said. As I said, it feels very similar, or rather than saying that, it feels that if you've played Age of Empires 2 and if you've enjoyed it, you can enjoy this game despite its lack of polish, lack of balance right now, but they need to support it to really be successful. That's how I feel about Age of Empires 4. Right now, it's not in the best state. They do need to improve on it. They need to work on it. They need to improve the factions. They need to balance them better. They need to fix some of the annoying issues, give us options. Like, I had the pro player that I know from Age of Empires 2 saying that she didn't like this game at all because of lack of control options, key binding changes and all that kind of stuff. There's some features that H2 has that this game doesn't have. It seems that's been improved, and hopefully things will continue to improve over the next few weeks, next few months, next few years even. Like, considering how long Age of Empires 2 stayed alive and still alive even after all this time, this could be a long-term project, and I certainly hope they give it the support that it deserves, but we'll just have to wait and see how things pan out with this particular title. I think Microsoft is trying to revitalize the real-time strategy genre, and I think in quite a few ways they're actually succeeding and they're doing the right things. I just hope that they show this game the proper support, because if they do, then we might have a really, really solid title years down the line with a horrible artistic style. Graphically, sure, that's not going to change, sadly enough. With that caveat, with a game that looks like it's taken from mobile game ads, with all that issues, but we might have a pretty solid game in terms of its gameplay, with a strong multiplayer community. In terms of the community, right now, a lot of people are still fresh, a lot of people are still learning. It's hard to talk about the multiplayer community when a lot of people don't know what they're doing. A lot of people are making mistakes. It can feel very, very frustrating to jump into a team game and just lose because one of your allies does absolutely nothing or does very little in the entire game, whereas the other is just going to throw away his entire ranged army against the artillery. When that happens, that can be feel very frustrating. But, you know, fresh game, a lot of people still learn, a lot of people have things to learn. What the game is suffering right now is from the lack of ranked play. A ladder. We need a ladder. We need ranked play. We need a Nilo rating. We need to be able to separate people who know what they're doing from people who don't know what they're doing, because otherwise you're just going to have a lot of frustrating games for everyone. It's not fun being a curb stomp. It's not fun being curb stomped. It's not fun in a lot of cases being the one doing the curb stomping, honestly. I mean, it's so easy to win so many multiplayer games right now for me personally, because I've just figured out, hey, if I focus on food and gold and focus less on wood, then, you know, I get ahead, I get a stronger army, I get early knights with either the Rus or the French, or even if I'm not playing those civs, I can get to Castle Age and unlock knights and just steamroll my enemy. But it's not fun having those matches all the time. It's not fun having that situation where we're just winning all the time. And I certainly hope that's going to change, but we do need an elo rating. We do need a ladder for that to change. So early steps, lots of things to be worked on, lots of things to be improved, lots of things, features, let's say, quality of life changes that need to be made, balance changes that need to be made, and a community that's still in its in early stages. Will it have staying power? I can't answer that. I think they've done a decent enough job for a start, at least on the multiplayer side of things, like in terms of the core gameplay, I guess is a better way of saying it. I think they've done a good job on that, especially in terms of trying to be a spiritual successor to Age of Empires 2. Where I feel they failed is in the graphical style. I feel they failed in not having a ladder system at launch. I feel their Art of War is not as great as the one is in Age of Empires 2. Like, seriously, it might be worth doing the Art of War and getting the gold medals in Age of Empires 2 more so than these ones to play this game, because yeah, the early economy kind of hit and miss, but if you can get a gold medal, you're actually doing a proper build order in that. But the other ones, not quite as much. The siege one is basically like, oh, siege rush tactics, but you wouldn't use that in a real game because it's risky to do that. Like, it's risky to rush so much in a siege against an enemy settlement because it can blow up in your face. Or with the late economy, where it's just basically a booming guide, and not a particularly good one either for booming. That's the problem. There's quite a few things in those Art of War missions that don't really hold up. And I think there is to a degree, and there is an inexperience from the developer. It probably would have been better if they had actually involved the community more, especially the pro player scene, which seems to be what they're doing with Company of Heroes Free, which, as I've said, seems to be in a really good, seems to be in a much better state, and actually shows more promise than this one. I wish they would have done that. I don't know if they did or didn't really. It feels like they didn't, but I can't say for certain, but it feels really like they didn't involve enough people, or even if they involved them, they didn't listen enough to them. And that's showing here in the game in terms of how certain things panned out, especially how the campaign missions and the Art of War and all that panned out. Like, the campaign is really a letdown in more ways than one, with some good moments. Kostin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.